Uh, we're taking control of the screen. So, Leanne, can you see our screen?
Not yet. There we go.
Okay. All right, little housekeeping here.
You're good.
And away we go. So we'll start off with an introduction and some thanks for letting us into your homes and wherever you might be viewing us today from other than Springfield, Illinois. If you hear my voice, my name is Steve Bequette. We're here at home just east of Hamel, Illinois. It's called Warden. And I am not a driver, not in transportation, just a fan. And I'm sitting here with my dad, Delmar Bequette.
And I started at BIE 58 years ago in the city of at St. Louis as a local P&D driver. Then I'd worked there casual since like October 61. So anyhow, there were some good years. So it was a wonderful company back then.
So Dad, Delmar's going to provide the flavor because he actually lived through a lot of what we're going to be talking through today. And I'm the researcher with his help provided a lot of the facts. So we wrote 2 articles that appeared in recent Wheels of Time. And rather than duplicate the articles, what we've done is we've selected 5 topics that we're going to talk about related to PIE, and where we've been able, either had the interest or we're able to come up with the material. So in between the 5 topics, we are going to take some questions, and we are going to kick it off with PIE and Life magazine, which takes us to December 1946. So in December 1946, World War II had just ended, just 90 days previously at the time of this article. The country had been on a war footing, civilians and soldiers alike. And we share something in common with the times today where, there's a change in our daily dynamic. So this is at a time where the country was shifting back to civilian life, and things were changing. One of the things that were changing was that PIE was not the largest by any stretch trucking company in the U.S., but they were one of the fastest growing, and they had strong financial backing, and they pulled together a leadership team where they were able to make changes. They operated between the West Coast and on the Pacific Coast in San Francisco, Oakland, and Los Angeles. That was on the west. And then the east, they terminated their service in Chicago and St. Louis. So to set the stage, this is a view in Oakland, California. It shows a Peterbilt and a Kruhoff trailer entering the yard in Oakland. In December 46, Peter Stackpole, who is a photographer for Life magazine, he followed the shipment from Oakland, California to Chicago, Illinois. It took 5 days. The Life magazine article appeared in January 20th, 1947 edition, and it brought national attention to PIE. We're going to follow his pictures and the photo record that he left, or some of it, what we could find, and see what happened. We placed them together in what we think is chronological order. So let's start the trip in Oakland as a Peterbilt enters the gate from a line haul trip from the east. This facility in Oakland that you see in front of you was pretty new in 1946. The PIE had just moved into that within the previous year during the war. There are some executive pictured. The man in the center, I haven't been able to get his name, but the guy on the left, his name is Ken Humphreys. He is the president and the architect of what PIE would become. And on the right is his operations manager. He was Gene Johnson. He's a former stunt pilot, turned kind of a detail guy and a planner for day-to-day operation. Again, I'm presuming this is the terminal manager, but he's leaning on the fender of a Dodge at the dock at Oakland. Some city equipment and line haul Peterbilt is in the background. So this is the city truck that the shipment, followed by Peter Sackpole, was followed. It's delivered to the dock. You'll see the driver in the back. Looks like a foreman and manager in the front, leaning on the fender of kind of an unusual job with a long box, or a Dodge with a long box and a tandem axle. Also, there's a piece of CF equipment to the right of it, freightways. So you see the load in the background leaving the truck, and the driver's going to put it into the system with the paperwork. The driver's moving the freight across the dock, and in a staged picture, PIE and Life took the time to simulate a load with the cost of the load and the contents to give the public an idea of just exactly what was moving across the highways for such long distances. PIE liked the long haul freight versus regional freight. So any particular article, what they targeted with their sales was a shipment that would make the most miles versus trying to saturate an area with freight coverage. So that was their specialty. That's what they like to do. And that's what their operations were modeled around at the time. And again, this is 1946. So the paperwork begins, and we get a glimpse of the administrative help in the office and their capabilities and their duties in a day where information was tracked on paper, and literally a beginning of a paper trail at the secretary's feet, moving across the floor. A glimpse through the offices of the different administrative types. This was not the headquarters of PIE at the time. This was one of their strongest terminals and generated some of the most freight, so it had a lot of people. But the headquarters was in Salt Lake City, which we'll get to see shortly. One of the influences of Gene Johnson was proficiency checks and safety training for drivers. Here there are a couple of simulators and tests for checking a driver's reaction and his response to simulated traffic conditions, and they're rated and graded. Also, they sought experienced, mature drivers, and generally you had to have at least 5 years experience and be over 25 years of age to be even granted an interview at this time. Here's the central, not the central, but the Oakland dispatch office. A few drivers in the background. You notice the uniforms. We're lucky to have one of the pieces of these early uniforms with us back here. So we've got one of the hats that were worn by these drivers in that time period. So in this photo, we're introduced to Tex Hauser. He's the guy on the right. He's showing up for work. He's going to take the shipment on the first leg. He is going to leave Oakland, and his route is going to take him over the Donner Pass on US 40. And his relay run, at the time there were no sleeper operations for PIE. His relay run is going to take him to Reno, Nevada. So Tex Hauser, he's showing up for work, and you'll notice in his hand, he has a metal toolbox, looks like a battery-powered lantern, a seat cushion, and some rubber boots for dealing with the snow that he would likely encounter at this time of year. And this is in the locker room in the Oakland terminal. So here's Tex again, getting ready for his trip. Got a forensic aide in the background with a a calendar with a lovely lady. It gives us the time period, December 1946. So Tex begins to prepare for his trip, filling out the paperwork, likely an inspection report on the tractor, beginning to fill out his logbook, etc. PIE also recorded the speed and the time of the trucks with a automated device called a tachograph. The picture here shows them loading in a new paper to keep a record of the trip. It would indicate the speeds at different time in the trip.
The RPMs.
And RPM of the engine. As a close-up of Tex, you'll notice that this unit is 3084. It's a tandem axle Peterbilt. Elsewhere in the article, they talk about it's 200 horsepower Cummins engine. So as he prepares to leave the gate, he would see this sign at any PIE facility to think, drive safely, control smoke and noise, be courteous. Beyond these gates, you are PIE. There's a reminder that you represent yourself and the company, that beyond your uniform, that you are an influence on the public, and which is an entire article was intended to influence the public positively towards trucking in general and PIE in particular. Some of the background to this article will come to light a little bit later, in that PIE was looking at national expansion even at this time. And they were interested in a company called Keishan. About 4 years after this, that would come to another conclusion, that story. But Keishan was actually up for sale, and PIE was in discussions to become national at this time. But it didn't happen. But that's what's going on in the background. One of their aspirations was to carry freight all the way to the East Coast. So Tex is leaving Oakland. He's pulling out of the gate in the Peterbilt in the 35-foot brown trailer, which was also an innovative and new piece of equipment. It used lightweight aluminum. It was one of the lightest trailers available. This particular trailer was not legal or not used east of Denver, but it was going to carry the particular shipment that Peter Stackpole followed as far as Denver. A single tractor and a single trailer with a relay of drivers was going to take this load all the way to Chicago. So out on the road somewhere east of Oakland, we're following Tex as he's traveling across California. See the mountains beginning to appear. And also you can note the condition of some of the roads, which look more like county or lesser roads in today's terms, but it was pretty much the norm in those times. Not that they didn't have concrete or pretty good highways in some places, but it wasn't universal. So Texas steadily gaining altitude. Pretty soon he's going to be crossing the Donner Pass. So here he is on US 40, and one of the warning signs, you notice the lighting on it, that the Donner Pass is not a road to be trifled with. And this sign functioned as an alert. It was convertible to show people that snow existed on the pass, and they might be expected to, one, encounter a closed road, or for trucking, they may have to stop and chain up.
Right. And those tractors were equipped with a 5 and a 3 transmission. And you went up the same speed you went down.
So here's a little bit of snow as he's encountering some altitude. I would imagine that with as much smoke as coming out of the stack, that he's on an upgrade. And also he looks like he's being passed by a small bobtail KB International tractor.
And it was cold enough, that was probably vapor too, coming out of that exhaust. beside the smoke, non-turbo.
So here's another view of the mountains with Texas steadily climbing. One of the PIE's policies, is that they would actually stop. They were required to stop every 50 miles, and that none of their runs were longer than 8 hours for the driver. And along the way, they would encounter some of their brother drivers, also for PIE coming the other way. So in one of these stops that was recorded, Tex encountered another driver coming the other way.
And the 50 miles is because they had rayon fiber tires, tube type tires back in those days. So you know what happened when one of them went flat? It didn't take it long to start burning.
So here's Tex encountering actually this is a separate unit than the previous picture, but he's encountering another driver who pulls over, and looks like there's a supervisor also in tow, and they pull over on the side of the road and have some conversation. You notice that both of them are bumping the tires. They've got a baton or a weighted
Bud bar
club to get the right tone out of the tires. One of the things I also noticed is that there's no mud flaps,
no bar either.
no bumper. There's a meeting with the supervision, and then back in the saddle. So by the time Tex pulls into Reno, it's dark. But he's not done yet. It's time to fuel the tractor, check the oil. He's probably thankful for the photographer's flash. I'm not sure how bright the light was. He's checking the transmission fluid. Notice the two sticks for the transmission.
They didn't use antifreeze until the mid-60s. So if they broke down, they was instructed to get out there and cut that radiator hose.
The next driver that took over, his name is Cessna, also in the same tractor. And again, with the same hat and nice and tidy in the uniform, and also a seasoned guy who took it to the next driver, Maxfield, who took it into Utah, but not yet Salt Lake City. And then driver Prout, who took it all the way to the Salt Lake City terminal. This is the unit going through downtown Salt Lake by the Mormon Temple. And this is the unit as it appeared in 46. Probably the highest concentration of Peterbilts in the world. This unit was built new in 1938 by one of PIE's predecessor companies. So a few close-ups of all the activity in the terminal with the maintenance and the tires, etc.
You notice the light cord hangs from the front of the trailer, and the glad hands came off the rear of the frame of the tractor. So that ought to have been nice with all that ice on them. So the unit's cleaned in Salt Lake City, and they also had a full line of maintenance. The license plate was required for each state that they traveled through. Here's a maintenance shop in Salt Lake City. Complete engine overhaul is available too. Injector maintenance, tires and more tires to keep a fleet like this running. Then the unit's ready to go. So driver Duffin took it from Salt Lake City to Rawlins, Wyoming. Along the way, they stopped and met with some other eastbound and westbound drivers at Shoopman's Cafe in Rock Springs, Wyoming.
supervision also made an appearance, which wasn't unusual. PIE maintained a fleet of cars and supervisors to monitor the routes and the drivers. Here he's prepping he's checking the oil in the truck, presumably at Rawlins. Bumping the tires, getting ready to turn it over to the next driver. And again, this is driver Duffin. And he turned it over to driver Nelson. So driver Nelson is out of Denver, and he is making a turn from Denver in relay, taking over the unit, and he's going to drive from Rawlins to Denver. Here he is entering Colorado, traveling east from Rawlins. He has to stop at the scale at the Colorado port of entry. Truck is weighed and inspected. And then he's back on the road with one arm through the steering wheel, manipulating the transmissions. Once he arrives in Denver, trailer 4166 is swapped out for trailer 4538. 4538 is a 32-foot trailer, which is now legal in the Kansas, Missouri, and Illinois, the next 3 states it'll have to traverse into. The routes east of Denver were acquired when PIE purchased a company called MK&C, and that only happened in the previous year and a half.
Notice a 35-foot on the one trailer and 32 on the other. So they exchanged the freight for 3 feet.
Every shipment east of Denver had to have a change of trailer. So driver Churgo took it east from Denver into a Kansas relay point, which we weren't able to quite decipher, but somewhere in the eastern part of Kansas. We think it's where US 24 would break away and go south into Wichita. Road conditions at the time, they're very proud that the highway is paved all the way. Welcome to Kansas. So the unit that they're using here is actually a single axle Peterbilt. It's unit 3505. Cummins powered. This is a front view of the same Peterbilt, either in Kansas or Colorado, heading towards Kansas City on US 24. Here's the unit entering Kansas City, going through some of the suburban neighborhoods to 1401 Independence Avenue is where the terminal and garage was at. This is a picture of the Kansas City facility and terminal. The shop is on the left, office is on the right. Every unit coming into Kansas City necessitated a change of tractor and driver because east of here, PIE also used company employees, owner-operators, who in appearance were no different than the Western Division guys, but they happened to own and operate their own tractors. So anytime one driver met another, there was a drop and hook of the trailer. They had 100 employees working out of Kansas City, and they had 100 drivers operating east of Denver, and 70 of these lived in Kansas City. The driver Dalton, he's the driver that took the Peterbilt 3505, which is a company-owned tractor, into Kansas City. And here he is in front of their shop. Same location, trailers getting washed, getting ready for the trip east. Also in Kansas, presumably in Kansas City at the time, was a homemade tractor that called the Larson. Peterbilt built, or PIE built this in their own shops. And it was a tandem tractor legal with a 35-foot trailer east of Denver. Here it is shown with actually a 32-foot trailer, but just a snippet of the short hood Peterbilt. Wayne Thrasher, he owned the Rio in the background, and he took this unit from Kansas City to Hannibal, Missouri. This is Wayne climbing out of Kansas City on US 24. Hopefully simulating a breakdown and a tire change on the side of the road.
These are gas engine.
And in Hannibal, Missouri, he met H.M. Richards, another owner-operator, who took the trailer 4538 into Chicago. This is Richards crossing the crossing the Mississippi River into Illinois at Hannibal. He has a little bit larger Rio with a Continental engine. And then the shipment arrives in Chicago. So we'll take a few questions now before we move on to the next section.
All right, we do have a couple. Ken Krause wanted to know, Delmar, were you still working for PIE when they took over Union Freightways out of Omaha, Nebraska? My father was a good friend of the owner of Union, and I can remember when the PIE equipment started coming into the Union territory, and it was much bigger and had the West Coast look at the time. Quite a change for the Midwest carriers that had interlined with Union for years.
No, it had happened before I started there. I don't know what, maybe Steve
59.
knows. 59, it started 59. I started in 62, but they were stretching the trailers that they had acquired from Union Freightways. They was adding the 3 foot to them, plus the other ones that was already in the PIE fleet. But they, I think PIE inherited all the Teamster contract back then was kind of goofy because it was left up to PIE whether, at that time, it was left up to PIE whether to take the ones that they had acquired or not. But it eventually changed where, you know, they had to dovetail them, which was a positive deal.
Okay, awesome. David Hollis would like to know, how large was PIE at this time? How many trucks, how many trailers? Any idea of how much money they made?
I do have an idea how much money they made. I'll see if I've got it in front of me. So just prior to this, they had 82 power units, but they were growing fast because they were delivering Peterbilts at different times through the years. So at the time this was taken, I'm going to estimate that they had around 60 Peterbilts, and they had probably around 70 owner operators with their own equipment. So the fleet, maybe around 150 units. On the revenue, I'll have to look that up on another slide and get back to you.
Right.
I don't have that at my fingertips, sorry.
All right, that's great. And then David Schnauz would like to know, did the drivers have to help on the loading docks on occasion?
And those who belong to the Western Conference, if you only worked, say, the driving time or your total time on duty was 15 hours, well, if your run only took 8 hours, well, then the road drivers could work on the dock, and they also pedaled en route also.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That's all the questions we have for now. So if you want to continue. And again, everyone, as you think of questions, just type them in and we'll get them asked.
Okay. Thanks for the
But
questions.
it was an unusual deal when during the war, the government actually bought, I forget how many, Steve knows, how many Peterbilts there was, but PIE run these trucks until the end of the war. At the end of the war, they let them buy them.
And Steve and Delmar, I did a couple more questions just came in. Greg wants to know, I noticed that the 1938 tandem Pete that started the trip seemed to have a long wheelbase, lots of length between back of cab and trailer. Was this because of West Coast bridge laws?
Yes. Bridge laws went back to what they call bridge formula, which uh, extends into a really engineering on which the states that mandated bridge laws, that engineering and that spacing dictated how far apart the weight was and how much weight was spread over the length of the combination. And those formulas were combined with gross weight, and they were different from state to state. So maximum gross weight and bridge law and length laws all combined to, at least in this time period, that PIU basically had two fleets. One that was legal west of Denver and the other one that was legal east of Denver. So yes, the spacing is directly traced to the bridge laws.
Which is still in existence today, a lot of it. Like when I started, they were stretching the trailers to 40 foot. You had some of the equipment they had, you either had a 43, 44, or 45 foot bridge. And it went from the center of the steering axle to the center of the rear axle on the trailer. And it depends on that. You couldn't actually total gross unless you had the 45 foot bridge.
All right. Tony said, did I see a Corbett in the Salt Lake City yard?
No, that was a Peterbilt. There's another story that goes with that tractor. It was shop built by the PIE maintenance supervisor. It was a tractor that was built with a short wheelbase using Peterbilt cab and Cummins running gear, but it was tandem, and it was designed to explore whether or not they could successfully use short wheelbase tandem axle tractors and 35-foot trailers west of Denver. There was one prototype built by PIE and another one built by Peterbilt. I'm not sure what became of those eventually, but they weren't put into production, and the tandem axle tractors did not see widespread service, at least in this time frame.
Okay. And Michael Gully just had a comment for you. Very nice presentation. He said, just a tad bit of detail. Relay east of Kansas City to Chicago was Pittsfield, Illinois, not Hannibal, Missouri. I know that well, as my dad relayed for other carriers out of Pittsfield and had many friends as owner-operators out of there. Pittsfield was the common relay point in the 1940s, 1950s, Kansas City to Chicago.
So our response to that is we were going by the pictures and when the tractors were changed. So unless the photos were staged to show them crossing at Hannibal, it tells us that they swapped the tractors somewhere on the west side of the Mississippi. And maybe that was just a function of how the photographer wanted to present the Mississippi River. We're not sure, because we always thought it was Pittsfield too. So our narration just followed the pictures. So yeah, we'd love to hear more details, but that's why we called it at Hannibal.
Yeah, awesome. All right, and Jeff said, in the early days, the 40s, was PIE only moving freight from the Bay Area, or did they have terminals in LA, Portland, Seattle, other places?
So early on, they had, in this time frame in 1946, and again, these pictures were taken really over just 1 week. But yes, they did have an LA terminal, and it was very vital. The LA terminal didn't exist at the beginning of PIE's existence, but it was a thriving part of the organization at this time. They did not extend much north of San Francisco. Basically, they were taking freight out of California and trying to project it as far as they could to the east. And they were also seeking interline shipments as much as possible, which kept Chicago and St. Louis busy as an exchange point for the freight. So no, they didn't go to Portland. That came later with the acquisition of West Coast Fast Freight in 1954.
And Orange.
Yeah, and Orange Transportation, which was later. That was in the late 50s.
And back to the fellow at the Union Freightways, they took they were like L or R or something, model mid 50s International, and they took them to the West Coast. They used them on pedal runs, like between San Francisco and LA or whatever. But eventually they wound up when they kept growing so fast, some of those old tractors, they took them in the shop in LA and completely cut 8 inches out of the hood for the weight limit. I mean, for the length limit and everything. And they were a mixture of little old Cummins engines and gas jobs, all different transmissions and everything. And they, I think about a half a dozen of them wound up in St. Louis.
All right, awesome. Larry asked, at this time, how many terminals did they have?
There were either 12 or 13 at this time. And some of those were, you know, maybe just a roof and a dock door or shared. We can get back to you in more detail on how big they were, but it was about 12.
All right, that looks like we have those for now. Go on ahead.
Okay, our next segment, it's in line with the growth of PIE. We're going to fast forward a few years to 1948. So with the issues that PIE had in changing equipment at Denver, it also became central in the organization in that just about every piece of equipment, short of the owner-operator equipment, which wasn't an issue east of Kansas City because they serviced their own, every piece of company-owned equipment pretty much made it through Denver on a regular basis. So in 1948, when they still had 35 and 32-foot trailers in the system and the situation of changing the equipment out, they constructed a world-class maintenance shop that serviced the whole fleet. The garage still exists today. It's in Denver. The terminal is gone, but it's next to US 40, which appears in the lower foreground. I think it's near 46th Street. But you'll see the shop up there, which had complete overhaul facilities. When this shop was in full swing in the early 50s, PIE was one of the 7 largest employers in Denver. It had 24/7 operations. We extracted some colored pictures from the Wheels of Progress PIE film, just to give you an idea of the color and the flavor of the shop as it existed in 1953.
Radiant heating in the floor.
The tractors were completely overhauled at around 180,000 miles, and these were scheduled maintenance. Later on they went to maintenance based on a little more data, but at this point in time they were going on scheduled overhauls. They knew when the tractor was going to be coming up for its overhaul. And you'll see far western and some eastern equipment showing up in the shop techs and their shop uniforms, nice and orderly. This would be a extremely nice facility even today. Complete washing facilities. You'll also notice the hood of a GMC over on the left, and one of the first yard spotting tractors moving the trailers around through the wash bay. The driver's pulling it through, making sure he stays dry. The fleet was 100% brown trailer at this time. Tractors were detail scrubbed and cleaned. Front end and wheel alignment. They were doing, at the start in 1948, they were doing 60 trucks a day in terms of in and out through the ready line. Dynamometer, cab change outs and cleaning.
It's a drone.
Yeah, you'll notice the equipment is changing. There's a 671 powered GMC in the background and a completely stripped cab over Peterbilt drome in the foreground. Notice this one's getting a engine change out. It has a supercharged Cummins, and the cab is manually tilted for this. Some of the shop facilities, you'll notice dromes in the background, one shiny, one dull, getting ready for paint, suspension in the foreground, and trailer bay in the back. There's an arrangement of cabs that look like they've been sanded, getting ready for repair and also repainting. Get another shot of the traffic in and out of the Denver bays. This is from the PIE log. This is a trailer shop. Did quite a bit of fabrication and modification of the trailers. This shot was taken a little bit earlier. PIE went to all mud flaps on all the road equipment in 1951. So this crew actually is retrofitting the brown trailers with mud flap kits, an additional 1/4-inch aluminum sheet metal that goes on the backside. Another shot of the wash bay. This is from a Diesel Progress magazine. There's a 671 Detroit and an unknown Cummins in this shot with some crankshafts on the left. Engine dynamometer test where they did full run-ups of the overhauled engines. And then nice shot of a preventive maintenance crew. And that was a fast track through the Denver shop. So we'll take a few questions on the Denver shop.
Sorry, I didn't hit my mute button. Don't have any questions right now. Anybody have any? If you want to stick your hand up or.
I think we'll advance on to the PIE and GMC in the 50s.
Okay. And again, if you guys have questions, just type them as you think of them.
Okay. So as 1950 arrived, PIE was still in the dual fleet mode. There was a change in the laws that helped out trucking in that 35-foot trailers were now legal through the entire PIE system, all the way from the West Coast all into Chicago. So PIE saw an opportunity, one, to convert all of their trailers to 35-foot, which they did with the Denver shop. They also acquired some new 35-footers. They kept all the aluminum browns and disposed of anything that wasn't a brown. And they also bought new 35-foot trailers. So with this, with the equipment being able to be consistent across the system, they saw an opportunity to increase efficiency and also adapt to the times. It was kind of hard to get new equipment, even this long after the war or now at the beginning of the Korean War. So they saw an opportunity to own the entire fleet. So they made a move to buy out all the owner-operators. But just prior to that time, they were experimenting with cab overs, which were required to pull the 35-foot trailers in the eastern states. Several of the owner-operators had their own cab overs. There were some Kenworth Bullnoses. They were also talking to Peterbilt at this time. But there were several Cannonballs in the fleet, and those were the tractors that that PIE bought. They bought a brand new fleet of 471 powered Cannonballs. Here it shows them in service, getting ready for service in March 1951. So these tractors took the place of all the owner-operator equipment. They bought most of it, put most of it into service, and disposed of the rest. But these are 471 powered GMC 740s with a twin hydromatic transmission. There were 40 of those. They also bought another 42 671 powered twin screw tractors that operated between Denver and Kansas City. So the 471 powered tractors didn't go west of Kansas City.
And the automatic transmissions didn't last from Denver to Pittsfield or Hannibal. And one of the mechanics out of St. Louis had to go convert it from an automatic transmission to a manual transmission in a foot of snow on the side of the road. At Hannibal, it took him 2 days. The transmission automatic didn't last very long. 471 didn't last too long.
So there were, these photos are all taken in Chicago. Here's another photo lifted from the Wheels of Progress video. And the customary control smoke and noise PIE sign. This is also Chicago. crossing the Mississippi River with a 471 Cannonball. But they didn't stop there. They also dabbled in the Western regulations with some conventional 671 powered units. And these units stayed in the fleet all the way through the end of the 1950s. They still appear in the background of different pictures, set up either as tankers or semis. Here's a 671 powered unit on a dyno in Denver.
But they originally had a, what, 110 engine in them?
Well, that
Didn't work out.
That's a different story, but in the same time frame. In the same time frame, they were dabbling with the cannonballs and the conventional 671 powered units. GMC approached them with an opportunity to test an experimental tractor powered by a 6-110 GM diesel, later on known as a Detroit diesel. It was a different unit. It had a centrifugal blower versus a roots type blower. So they painted up a unit and let PIE put it into service. It was experimental. It was taller, had a longer hood than its smaller 671 powered cousins. They let their driver of the year take this tractor from delivery in Denver all the way into the Oakland terminal. General Motors followed them with a photo truck and a photo crew. So it took several days to get there because they stopped so often. And here's the driver of the year, Chapman, meeting the president of PIE as he pulled into the Oakland terminal. This was the first time they had met. A little bit later on, in 1954, PIE merged with West Coast Fast Freight, which was a major carrier that ran through the Pacific Northwest and gave them rights to go between Denver and the Pacific Northwest, and also short hauls up and down the West Coast, all the way from Seattle down to LA. So now they found themselves in the short haul business and also able to take advantage of a change of operations going to sleeper team. They bought 80 Cab Over International sleepers. Those were put into service in October 1954. And just a few weeks later, in early 1955, they put into service 30 new GMC 950 cab over tractors. They were powered by 671s, and it replaced the relay teams. So this chapter also signaled the end of the 471 and the 671 powered day cab cannonballs. Here's a close-up of the tractor. Originally, they were equipped with single axles, but pretty early in their career, they were outfitted with pusher axles. The entire fleet was changed to 35-foot high cube trailers with sliding tandems and air ride, also in the same time frame. So they converted all the trailers and most of the tractors. Here's a 950 featuring its modified pusher axle. Also a cut down sleeper box that was needed to clear the reefer unit over the top of the cab. These tractors also featured aluminum wheels. The one in the photo has a mix of tubeless and tube type tires. It's pretty late in its career. These units don't seem to have lasted very long, maybe not past 1957, just a couple of years. The Internationals, however, did stay in service. This is one of the GMCs as a tanker. This picture, I think, was taken in 1959 in Oakland. So they did last a long time, at least in the conventionals. And GMC, they were not in PIE service after this time, at least not as road equipment until for the 70s.
But they had acquired system tank lines with West Coast Fast Freight.
Yeah, they got into the tanker business along with West Coast. They went to short haul and also tanker. So we can take a few questions at the end of that segment.
Okay. Jeff wants to know, what is the shop currently being used for and by who?
Well, it looks like it's for sale. So it looked like it had been a tire shop. The demise of the general shop as Denver, I think it was only in service, and I can only infer that from the records, in that in the company documents showed that it was put up for sale, I think in the late 50s or early 60s. And I think they disposed of it as a general shop. It was replaced as a general shop by Los Angeles, which was an even bigger shop. And also by their ability to, they had full service garages at most of the terminals around the country. So they did a couple of things after this. They distributed it around the system, and they maintained a central shop in LA, and another high-end shop responsible for a lot of their experimentation was in Oakland.
All right. And Greg wants to know, do you know where the Chicago terminal was located?
Their second terminal was located at 36th and Western. And that, I think that was in service in 1950, I think, 50 or 51. I'll have to check my documents. And then in 1964, I think they moved out to Archer Avenue. And I think it's also known as Summit, Illinois. The terminal prior to that, I'm not sure the address. I do have a picture of it. It was a 9-door terminal. It came along with M, K, and C. I speculate that they moved around in those years before they built their terminal at 36 and Western, but I haven't found that in print.
Awesome. And David Schnauz has a comment. He said, amazing how an engine overhaul needed to be performed so early back then. Now we can go a million miles with proper maintenance.
Yeah, they were learning as they went through all of this. None of the things they found successful were ready-made, and they certainly weren't batting 1,000 on everything they tried. There were other truck lines and other engineering leaders across the industry trying different things, and they were experimenting. But they were also finding, like their peers in the industry, that it was profitable to experiment and try new things. And by they, I mean drivers and management and all workers alike. They were good at fostering a team spirit and pushing ideas from the bottom up, and also adjusting the rules from the top down. They were famous for having a company manual to keep to moderate performance and regulate performance across the company, but it was subject to change and training.
And they had a diary with every tractor and every trailer. It had a box with all the paper, and it was like had carbon copies in there. It was like either 2 or 3 copies that the driver had to finish every, and then when it showed the mechanic what the mechanic done to every one of them. So they double checked on one another. But they had a connection with UCLA early on, and they would have the oil tested, and it still is going on today, where the different bearings or wiring parts in those engines, well, they can tell by an oil analysis what's got the problem.
Awesome. All right, Greg said, do you recall the ATHS member who became a dentist in Aspen, Colorado? He worked for PIE in the summers and had a collector truck decked out in PIE colors that would regale us with great stories.
We got to meet him. His name was Don Chu, and I think he lived in Brighton, Colorado. But we got to meet him, and he did another PIE presentation in 2007. And he had some good stories, and also he took the initiative to go after the PIE archives when PIE went out of business.
And equipment too. He had an old high cab. He had, I don't know whether he restored or whether whatever happened to it, but that PIE had.
Yeah, he's a member that's passed away. His name was Don Chew. Donchew.
Awesome. And
Not
Tony,
Rich.
okay, and Tony asked, you showed a GMC with a refrigerated trailer. When did PIE get into refrigerated freight?
PIE was trying refrigerated freight from their earliest days. In fact, they inherited that and tried it, experimented with it from the late 30s. So they always had them. In fact, they converted 25 Brown trailers in 1946 to reefer configuration. They took out a couple of patents on that. So it sounds like a great story, but it doesn't seem that those trailers actually lasted. So we're not sure of that, but they kept at it. They kept trying. We're going to go over some of that here in a few minutes. They had reefer trailers probably up to the early 70s, mid 60s, and then they finally decided to get out of that. But they were trying it throughout the first 25 years of history, or 30 years actually.
All right, we have one last question on this section, and we'll let you get on. Michael Gawley said, you mentioned the president's name, but for his notes, could you restate that? He didn't get it written down.
Oh, the president, his name was Ken Humphreys. He was not the original president, but he was the architect of most of the growth through the 40s and the 50s, and he passed away in the late 50s. A.K. Humphreys was his name. He went by Ken, and his operations manager was Gene Johnson.
Awesome. He said, excellent presentation. While much of it he is familiar with, he is learning a great deal. Most of his knowledge has been the KCY to Chicago leg from stories with his dad. On the High Mountain Internationals, a very good friend of his father's was killed in a bad accident near Aurora, Illinois. Another truck hit PIE head on. My dad's good friend burned up in the sleeper as the truck caught on fire. Fires from accidents were much higher frequency back in those days.
Yeah, sorry for the loss, and thanks for the compliments. Shared it. And
Michael, yes, this presentation is being recorded, and we will have it posted hopefully either later today or tomorrow on the ACHS website. All right.
Okay, should we go on to the next section? Okay. So PIE and double trailers. So early on, PIE tried truck and trailer combinations. PIE struggled through their first years, 40, 41, 42. So until they figured out what the target market really was that they wanted to concentrate on, they had a variety of relationships and also business models that weren't consistent. So until they went to the long haul, they had a variety of truck and trailer equipment, which you see ahead of you. PIE was the first company outside of CF to use Freightliners, and they were involved with Consolidated Freightways, an arrangement called Freightways, which was dissolved by 1944. So their first dabble in something that would resemble a double trailer was the unit in front of you. What they standardized on early on by 1943 was a tractor trailer semi combination. What you see ahead of you is a picture taken in 1951. It shows a 35-foot Brown trailer that was stretched from 32 foot, if you'll notice on the left. But this is pretty much what they used through the system. And at this time in 1951, they could take this trailer all the way from Chicago and St. Louis, take it all the way across the country, and then turn it right back around and come back. But the Western laws allowed the capability of hauling even more freight. So beginning in 1950, they acquired an initial batch of 40 dromedary Peterbilts, which were cab over configuration. They used the same wheelbase and powertrain as a conventional. to allow a 12-foot or an 11-foot-6 extra cargo box that sat on the frame between the cab and the front of the trailer. So this allowed extra capacity out west where they could use it. And by west, I mean between Denver and LA and San Francisco. So these units were quite common out there, but they had to be changed out in Denver.
See the vintage turn signal?
So this is one of the dromedaries late in its career. They started to convert these to conventional configuration in 1957, and eventually all of them were out of the fleet and reconverted back to conventionals with brand new cabs by 1958. If you notice in the center of the picture, it shows one of the Achilles heels of the dromedary configuration. This picture was taken in Denver. It shows the dromedary. It has to be backed into the dock, which means that the power unit is tied up at the dock while it's being loaded or unloaded, and it's out of service. They took the dromedary to its ultimate configuration with a twin steer version prototype, the XD30, used a 17-foot box. This one was scratch built in the Oakland shop by the team it pictured. And eventually they bought 20 additional Kenworth dromedaries in 1955 and 1966. And they had 81 dromedaries total by that time. But again, they were all out of service by 1958.
Experimenting with air ride.
So these tractors had the same issues as the earlier ones, where they had to be backed into the dock to be loaded or unloaded. Another issue they had at the same time, again, this is 1955 and 1956, is that with the merger with West Coast Fast Freight, they found that their competition in California along the West Coast north-south routes was better than them. That PIE, using the dromedary and the semi-configured tractors, it took additional time to break out loads, especially in the San Francisco to LA market. And they needed a different type of equipment to save time. It turned out that they didn't have to look very far, just at the competition and what they were using. So they began to try doubles in 1956. They acquired 10 Freightliner tractors and 20 Fruhoff trailers. The Fruhoffs were 25-footers. And we found some files in the archives that show them trying out the very first units. The PIE log and the annual reports describe this as a supercharged Cummins-powered Freightliner, and there were 10 of these. It also marks one of the first uses of tubeless tires and in the fleet. So we're showing the shop crew and the driver crew just trying out their sea legs on the first set of doubles, manually manipulating the converter and putting the set together. And there they are.
See the chalk block under the trailer wheels at the dock? That was mandatory. Every tractor had a chalk block on it. If you didn't have it under the wheel, you was parked, why, you'd get a warning letter. This picture was taken in Oakland. You'll notice it's a mixed facility. They have semis. This very first set of doubles, there's tankers in the background. This configuration saved them 4 hours on the Los Angeles, San Francisco / Oakland route. And that's where they dedicated the use. They just basically went north-south, and the semi-pup was ready for offloading at its destination. They didn't have to reload it onto city equipment. They also tried turnpike doubles in Kansas, 1958. Not sure of the history of this, but it is a pretty interesting photo. The trailer in the back is a reefer. This is an older tractor that had been upgraded and converted. In 1958, they converted their entire fleet
of Western tractors to 240-gallon fuel tanks, which you'll notice in the next photo. This is leaving the Kansas Turnpike. There is a gap in the history of doubles between 1955 and then 1959. Presumably they retained those in service, but in 1959 they purchased an unknown number of white 5000 tractors, which are fiberglass, and they put them into service. They also bought 150 Trailmobile 24-foot pup trailers. The tractors didn't last very long in service, but they were in long enough to pose for a number of pictures, which we were able to get our hands on. This is one of the first units also in Oakland. You'll see a variety of equipment in the background, including one of the GMCs in the center of the photo, getting ready to go. And they use these between the West Coast and Denver. They didn't use doubles west of Denver until after 1962. There's also a variety of trailers. These look like the earlier first purchased Fruhofs, at least the front box. And they had different lengths. They had 24s, 25-footers, and 28-footers. And they used them in different combinations and different parts of the system. There's an unknown ventilation box that appears in this one. If anyone knows what that is, then I'd like to hear from them.
Those tractors didn't last long. They just couldn't hold together.
They also changed their hat badges in the late 50s to reflect the change in the equipment. Presumably this is after 1963 when they went to air conditioning, which appears on this hat badge. They also experimented with a doubles tractor with a sliding cab, which had some of the tanks, like the air tank, integrated into the frame and other unique features, but it didn't get past the experimental stage. This was powered by a V8 265 Cummins, a low-profile engine.
235, the first one.
I think this is a later one. They also dabbled in a powered converter dolly. There were quite a few pictures of this in the PIE files up in Kansas City, with no narrative to go along with it, but it looks like an interesting situation. In the late 50s and early 60s, they were acquiring new equipment at a much higher frequency, in addition to just the flat-out purchases of other companies like Orange Transportation and Union Freightways. So most of the over-the-road fleet was becoming Peterbilt at this time, and there were some internationals left over from 1954 and 1956. These are also powered by V8 Cummins. I think these are the earlier versions, 235?
265.
265. These tractors had 4x4 transmissions. Here it is being inspected by some of the mechanics. Here's some more reefers around the same vintage, early 60s, very late 50s. These are two 28-foot diesel-powered reefer units.
103-inch wheelbase.
Into Chicago and St. Louis, once doubles were allowed west of Denver in 62, and then throughout the system in 1963, the sleeper cab doubles tractors, Peterbilts, began arriving in both cities. They did have a large fleet of semis that went through this, but again, freight volume was, they were able to increase it without actually increasing the number of tractors and drivers. Again, an air-conditioned Peterbilt.
Air conditioning came out in 63.
Single axle sleeper cab Kenworths and some tandems appeared in 1965. in the eastern part of the system, they ran 24-foot doubles. Here's a V8 powered Freightliner, which also appeared in late 65.
Weed burner, no stack.
You said 903?
No, those still had the
No, these are 265.
265.
These are 265 powered. Slant back cabs for clearing the reefer. And also Macs began appearing, both single axle, Western Macs, and tandem axle sleepers. This cab over International originally entered service in late 54, but here it is in 1966 pulling a set of doubles. So these lasted in the fleet quite a while with a lot of modifications. This picture was taken in Topeka. And eventually they went back to turnpike doubles once they merged with All States Freight from Ohio. That took them into the East Coast. And they were able to run turnpike doubles where allowed east of Chicago. So we can take a few questions here.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, so we'll get to some of the questions. I got a couple that are related here. How did they unload the dromedaries at the dock, or with the frame and the fifth wheel extended behind the box, or were the docks modified to accommodate them?
I haven't seen that actually captured in a photo, with somebody standing there. It looks like, at least in the picture we have in Denver, that the dock hands would have needed some sort of a bridge plate to extend from the dock out to the drone box. We're not actually sure, and if someone could fill us in or if they actually unloaded one, I'd love to hear from you.
All right, and just a couple of little statements, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up because we do have another webinar starting here soon. Michael Gawley said Don Chu was a mechanic in Denver and knew much of the PIE history. He was on the ATHS board and managed and hosted the 1990 ATHS convention in Denver. The dentist, though, you're referring to is Dr. Bill Komowicz.
Thanks.
So, and then Greg said, gentlemen, I pulled my 2005 ATHS Showtime, so you can go back in your archives, and found a photo of Dr. Bill's 1954 white Freightliner tandem tanker with the 1954 Fruhoff trucker tanker pup. Very memorable. And then Bill said, are there any of these pictures available through ATHS? I also build models and would like to get some of the photos. So I do believe some of these photos are in the archives.
Most of them are from the archives.
Okay, I thought.
That tanker, Bill Komkowicz, is, I think, an ATHS member from Indiana, purchased that.
Awesome. Keeping it in the family. Well, thank you, gentlemen. That was absolutely amazing and so incredibly informative. I hate to cut it a little short, but we do have another webinar coming up here in just about 15 minutes. So feel free to take a little break and then come join us for that. And
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
thank you. We'll see you guys at the next one.
Bye.